for this opportunity. I guess through the stories that you will hear, in my colleagues and friends, you will realize that we not only helped in Maceno, they help us, and we help ourselves to become better people and better physicians. I want to give this little card saying our thank you to you for giving us the opportunity to UT to be part of this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And the three of us will give a little part of our story there. Dan, who is the smart one, will he has a nice presentation, and he will kind of give the setup on what we did.
Thank you, Carlos. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Dan Ketterer. I made a little presentation to show you guys just a little bit of what the experience was like at Maceno Mission Hospital. Just a little bit of introduction. What this global medicine elective really is. It's available for any internal medicine resident or med-peds resident. Carlos and I are both internal medicine residents. Desi is a med-peds resident. It's a 1-month elective to help the underserved population of Western Kenya and get an idea of the impact of U.S. medicine and global medicine, mission medicine on the rest of the world. So it took place at the Maceno Mission Hospital in Maceno, Kenya, which is on the western part of Kenya. I'll show you on a map. It's affiliated with the Anglican Church of Kenya. It's the main center of care for the small village of Maceno and many of the surrounding villages. The attending is Dr. Carrie Hardison, a good friend of Dr. Bruce Steinhauer's, and they had pretty much the full scope of care, including medicine, pediatrics, OBGYN services, and some surgical services. So Maceno, if you look on the map of Kenya, this is the whole map of Kenya. It's on the western part of Kenya here. The laser thing doesn't work. But I'll show you a little bit closer. So this is up right on Lake Victoria. You see where Kisumu is on that map? Mm-hmm. So Kisumu is the third biggest city, and Maceno is located right where that little dot is. So it's just it's about 25 kilometers or so from Kisumu, right on the edge of Lake Victoria. And it's a very high elevation, and it's right on the equator. So it stays cool and the weather stays the same. And if you're lucky enough to climb the mountains like I did, you can see this amazing landscape with Lake Victoria. So I talked a little bit about the discrepancies and challenges of doing medicine in Kenya. Some of these things I just did not expect. Even though it was an Anglican church, people were still expected to make payments. And because of the lack of infrastructure in Kenya, you can't just say, I'm going to bill you later. You have to pay at that point. And there were so many challenges that we faced because several of the people that we didn't see were the sickest people were right outside our gate. And they felt obliged that if they were to come to the hospital, they would have to raise the money necessary before coming into the hospital. So some of the sickest people we never even got a chance to see. And some folks that did ended up coming to us had a lot of trouble leaving because payment was required. The other thing, limited access to technology. Resources there were very limited. For example, our mainstays of technology that we have here in the United States for diagnosis, CT, MRI, we just don't have those things. We were limited to a very old X-ray machine and a portable ultrasound. And those required electricity, which was very unreliable, and we had maybe about 60 to 70% of the time. So there would be days where we would have absolutely no electricity. The hospital is mainly run by clinical officers, which are folks that are similar to nurses here with a little bit more training. But there aren't that many MDs that are running these hospitals. We had a very limited formulary of medications, many of which are not used in the United States or considered old or outdated medicine. We had language barriers and cultural barriers between the different tribes. And I'm not really going to get into the last one that much, but I'll give you guys a link at the end. But I mean, it is still a country that is very much divided by its tribes, in which Kenya is made up of over 40 different tribes. And I'm just going to give you a little introduction to some of the people involved. This is Dr. Hardison, a rare picture of him smiling. If you guys will ever meet him, you will see, if you have a camera out, the guy just immediately will frown for the camera, like intentionally frown and just look like the Grinch. And that's Lynette, his assistant. She was very helpful in translating for us. We were one of the few centers in the area that would do GI procedures like endoscopy. So we would get referrals from all over the western part of Kenya to do endoscopy, which is where you go down someone's throat with a camera that's on a very long hose, so that way you can see if someone has cancers, for example. And we diagnosed many gastric and esophageal cancers that month. This is his wife, Nan Hardison, at the orphan program. She's a large part of their mission there and a large reason why they're there, and she is very active with the Anglican community there. Just does so much for the village of Maceno, and they both deeply care about the people there. These are two of the folks that I was very fortunate enough to stay with that entire month. On the left is David, on the right is Helen. David is an ENT nurse from Cape Cod. Helen is a fourth-year medical student from University of San Diego. And they were there with me for 3 weeks out of that month, and they just made my experience so much better. I never felt alone when they were around. And we would, at night, when the sun would go down, we would be locked in our house at about 6:30, and we would just stay up and tell stories. These are the wards that we have. This is actually the women's ward, but they're all very similar. As you can see, it's made up of antiquated beds. You can see the mosquito nets that are hanging over each of the beds. A very common thing that you'll see there. And it's also open to the environment, as you can see from the door at the end. Thankfully, we didn't get too many monkeys running around. I'm just going to tell you really quickly about two patients I saw there that were very touching to me. This girl here, David and Helen had met the day prior on a home visit. We would do home visits to visit HIV patients that were too sick to be able to leave the home, and they visited the home of this young lady, and her family was preparing for her to die. They knew that she was end stage. They knew that her situation was incurable and she was losing so much weight that they figured that she would be dead within a day or two. We had asked them to come into the hospital, but the family said, we cannot afford to do that. And so Helen and David left with heavy hearts, but we were surprised to see that her family had brought her in overnight, and she was in the bed, and we got to work feeding her this tube around her ears called a nasogastric tube, and we were feeding her through this tube. And then we shot a chest x-ray and saw that her chest x-ray was filled with miliary tuberculosis, which is a very common finding there. And she had disease everywhere from head to toe. It was thin, but we all had hopes of saving her. And she did so well and started to come around until 3 days later she unfortunately succumbed to her disease. This is Samson, one of my favorite patients. This is a 13-year-old boy. He had a headache, and his parents had taken him to a witch doctor because they believed that the traditional medicine would kill him. It's hard to see here, but he actually has a cut on his head, these 3 cuts on his head, where the witch doctor did some sort of surgery on him. And we don't know what it was. But he developed this enormous lump on his head that was an infection, an abscess. And here I am, we put a needle in this abscess and just got out infection and pus. I eventually had to take this kid to the operating room and put him under general anesthesia to do this drainage. And afterwards, he felt much better. And I thought, this was a success, but he ended up coming back to us about a week later with seizures, and his vision was getting very poor. So he ended up getting transferred to the government hospital for a CT, and there isn't a night that I hope that he's doing okay and pray for him. The children in Kenya are just so beautiful.